Welcome to Producer's Toolbox. I'm your host, Carole Adrienne, and today, for all of you filmmakers, documentarians, content creators, we have a really special treat for you today. You are going to meet an important American documentary filmmaker who has 10 films at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C., and an amazing array of experiences, including being a mentor for my work, something that we are going to talk about a little bit, the importance of mentoring. So I'd like you to meet documentary filmmaker, director, producer, Sy Rotter. Hi, Sy.
Hello, Carole.
Sy's become my good friend over the last several years, and I'm very grateful. You have got a really packed CV. You got a degree in public health. You've served in the Army, dealt with psychiatric specialties, anti-poverty, and one of my favorites, helping American wildlife cross busy highways safely. But you've made important documentary films, and I want to talk about that today. I want to talk about, now, at one point, you did volunteer work for the Holocaust Museum. Can I take you there and start you off?
Well, it's as good a place to start as any, and probably a better place than most. Sure. Actually, the genesis of my activity as a documentary film producer, etc., began out of the blue when I became a volunteer. It wasn't a museum at that point. That was 1989, and it was a work in progress. But the museum organizers felt that it was time to begin developing a repertoire of survivor testimonies to be used in the museum. And they put out an ad in the local newspaper for volunteer interviewers. And as you had mentioned, in my Army activities, I again, in a serendipitous manner, I found myself in the Army Medical Corps, having no training and having no experience in that field, but quickly learned and found that interviewing was one of the skills that I was introduced to. And interviewing, of course, is the essence of documentary filmmaking, or at least in my case it was. So it was a call for volunteers. I volunteered, went through a training program at the museum, went to my very first interview and was introduced to a Polish Catholic woman whose story of rescuing and saving the lives of 13 Jewish fugitives, men, women, and children, by hiding them in her home for 2.5 years, just blew me away. It was totally unexpected. And I realized very quickly in this 3-hour interview that took place with her and with her husband, one of the 13 whom she rescued and married after the peace arrived in her community, realized that it was too important a story to just sit on a museum shelf waiting for somebody to ask for it, when there was no reason to believe that anybody would even know about its existence. I was not a documentary filmmaker. I knew nothing about the field, never went to school, never learned about it. And my first reaction was I would take my home-designed camcorder, put it on my shoulder, and interview them. And then I didn't know what I would do with it, but I thought it might be interesting to have. And the more I thought about it, and the more I agonized over the stupidity of what I was thinking of doing, the more I realized that it was appropriate for somebody who really knew how to make a documentary film to undertake the activity. So I asked around. Washington, D.C. was where I was living at the time, and I found that the first question I got was, do you realize how much it's going to cost? And I had, of course, no idea what it cost. It never even entered my mind.
You also found a book. Did you? I mean, you
Yes.
embarked upon self-education, didn't you?
I did indeed. And Carole, your viewers may find it amusing, but I found it extremely important. It was called The Filmmaker's Guide for Dummies, or the Documentary Filmmaker's Guide for Dummies. And I qualified as that. And after immersing myself in that, the Bible, as I call it, I realized that I really didn't know what it was to make a documentary film. But I soon found out, and I soon became a volunteer filmmaker and have maintained that status in all of the work I've done during the many years that evolved since then. So that was a long answer to a short question, but that's how I began.
Now, what spoke to you? There's the very famous Steven Spielberg film, Schindler's List, which also deals with a rescuer. But when you stumbled on this story or excavated it, really, what was speaking to you that?
Well, I think growing up in New York City, in a Jewish family, the stereotypical information that was prevalent in the community was that Polish citizens, by and large, non-Jews, were not that friendly nor that concerned about the welfare of Jewish fugitives during the Holocaust period. And I never spent very much time thinking about it until that moment, and until I listened to what was happening in the 2.5 years of this woman's life. She was indeed 16 years old when she undertook this responsibility with her 6-year-old sister. Her mother had been taken by the Germans to work in a factory in Germany. Her father had died, and she was alone. And I thought, as I contemplated who else was better prepared than I, having heard that story, to make an effort to organize the documentary filming. I was not about to learn how to be a filmmaker, so I have to clarify the title. I was never a filmmaker per se. I was a film organizer. Experts had to make the film. I wouldn't know which end of a camera to point, and I never did learn. Even though I did have an experience once of making a film, it was with a very small movie camera, but that's another story. But you ask about the moment that I realized that it was important. It wasn't a moment, it just gradually grew on me. And I finally succumbed and went out and found an advisor who knew documentary filmmaking, listened, read my Bible, the Bible being, again, the Dummies Filmmaker's Guide, and set about to organize the whole filming process.
Well, I have to stick up for producers, because I realize I'm a producer too, and a producer really is an organizer. And many of us could not operate the camera, could not light the set, could not edit the footage. However, we have the vision, and it's so much better to work with people who are experts in their field. I mean, I've always found the best way to get it done is to ask the technical crew what they need, get it for them, and they will give you everything. So they're wonderful. I can relate to that. But so you really are a producer director. I think you fit neatly into that particular category. I wanted to ask what your advice to anyone thinking about making a documentary, and I realize some of our audiences may not be thinking about the PBS POV special. They may be making a short film to have family history available in an accessible way. What are your best pieces of advice to someone setting out that way who is coming from a similar place? Let's assume, they have the organizational producing desire, but not necessarily the technical skills.
Well, they're very fortunate to be able to use their cell phone, for one. They don't have to go out and buy new equipment. They've got it. And the cell phone is an amazing device. And when used properly, you can make just about any kind of documentary film that you have in mind. I think that eliminates a very large cost element. I think among the interesting aspects of the filmmaking process is the organizational task of defining more precisely than in a general way what it is you want to film, who it is you want to film, and why it is that you want to film that person or persons. And then to do the basic research, to ask the questions of the people who you believe merit or are appropriate for the film you want to produce. Family films are great. I've done a few of them myself, not with a cell phone because I'm still looking for the dummies guide for cell phone users. But the importance of doing the research, so you're not flying on a hope and a prayer. You know basically what it is you're interested in recording. You understand that the documentary aspect of what you're doing is that it is essentially enabling the subject to tell his or her story. You're not there to interpret the story. You're there to record the story. You're not there to tell the individual what to say, but to listen patiently while that person sorts through the memories that you're evoking and finds the words to use for his or her statement. Much of what I learned in the Army's psychiatric experience was the importance of listening, not just to what you hear, but what you don't hear, what you're wondering, why, in view of what the person has said, did he or she stop at a given point and not elaborate? And the ability that the interviewer has is that he or she can reframe the question and encourage the person to find his or her own way of responding. So you try to get not only the beginning of the story, but as the expression goes, the middle and the end of the story. And time when you're using your cell phone camera is not really the essence. As long as the battery is functioning, you have unlimited time. And that's one of the more important things to remember when you're beginning your work. Do the research, make sure you know why the person is being interviewed, make sure you use just a few words of guidance to the interviewee. When I began filming, I realized that if I kept my questions down to 3, I could conduct an interview in about 15 minutes, which saved enormous amounts of time and money in the long run. And the 3 questions that I developed were, what did you do that brings us together at this moment that we're going to be recording? And then the second question was, why did you do it? And to sit back then and listen. What did the person say about why he or she did what it is you're interested in recording? And then the third question was, what difference did it make to you and to the person who's telling the story? And in those 3 questions, I was able to produce the 10 or 12 films that you mentioned. Basically, in each of these interviews that I conducted, some of them took longer than 15 minutes, but generally, they didn't have to take more than 15 minutes. And as I was working with a film crew in all of these programs, and they were all filmed in Europe, and they were all filmed on location, and they were all subject to the vicissitudes of logistics and money and cost, all of which I had to go out and find, as Carole, you are experiencing. It doesn't come to you. You have to go out and find it. And that was a technique that I did not hear other documentary film producers and directors using, but I found it extremely important. Short questions, specific, guiding the interviewee into further exploration of any one or the other of the answers, to make sure you had the viewer in mind who's going to ask the question, well, why didn't he or she ask the follow-up question? Well, that's a good issue, and that's what I encourage people to realize. You have the 3 questions to ask. No one prevents you from asking a follow-up question to either or to any of the 3 until you feel that you have the body of the story captured in your camera, so that the editor can help you then transform the raw footage that you have, combine it with the archival footage that you'll develop in photographs and in memorabilia that the person has to show you, to add to the texture of the film that you're working on. And out of the melange of information that you're developing, to be able to find the music that suits your sensitivity as the filmmaker, producer, director, enabler, facilitator, all of the above. And you come out with a finished program that you can be proud of.
I think what you said about interviewing is so important, because just as the producer or director, you need to establish a bond with your subject and then kind of set it up for them and let them roll with whatever is in their heart to say. But the interview really is so key. Now, you filmed in many countries. I'm remembering Italy, Poland, Germany, several Scandinavian countries, right?
All 4 of them: Norway, Denmark, Finland, very interesting stories in Finland. Where else did I film? I guess I've forgotten now, but Greece was another one.
Greece, yeah. So,
And I had the good fortune of having been working. I should have mentioned the very important feature that I was a businessman. I had never studied filmmaking, but I was a reasonably accomplished business person. So I had my own company, and I was the boss. So I could take the enormous amount of time that was needed without asking for permission. I had a staff that worked well without me, probably better without me than with me around. And I had an income, two of the basics. And I had the money to start this whole process until I really caught up with what the professionals in the field have known. And that is, you got to get out and hustle and get the money to finance this whole activity. And at the time I began, the motto that was used was $1,000 a minute. I don't know if that's still bandied about, but when I asked, what does it cost to produce a documentary film? That was the answer I got, $1,000 a minute. Wow, I said to myself, 60 minutes, $60,000. That's far beyond my abilities. And so I started out with a much more modest amount. And I also found that I didn't waste time. And I didn't just let the camera dictate to me what the time was that I needed. If I felt I had the answers I was looking for in 10 minutes or 15 minutes, that was enough for me. And it saved an enormous amount of time in the studio for the editing. And I came back from this first film in Poland where I took Stefania and her husband, and we walked through 12 different scenes that I had picked up from reading and rereading the transcript of her 3.5-hour interview. I found that the opportunity to keep the filmmaking process limited gave me a ratio of essentially 4 minutes of film for every interview, 4 or 5 minutes. So I only had 2 characters to interview, Stefania and her husband. So that really wasn't a major factor. But when I had other films where there were 10 or 12 people to interview, 5 minutes of interview time in the final film for each of these people was an hour. And that went by very fast. But it was better than sitting in a studio for days and weeks trying to cut back from 100 hours down to 4 or 5.
another really notable thing about your films, and I want to let everybody know, we are going to put the URL for the Holocaust Museum at the end of this segment so that you can go there and view Sy's films. But your narrators are some of the most famous actors of their day. They're, I guess, part of the greatest generation. Your films are narrated by Alan Alda, Eli Wallach, Liv Ullman, Theodore Bikel, Uta Hagen, Irene Pappas, who were major movie stars of their period. How did you get them to do that?
Well, frankly, I never got them to do anything. I never met with them. But the people with whom I had business contacts and personal contacts involved in encouraging the story to be told, they found the way to contact Liv Ullman and Alan Alda and the others. And I must say, to their credit, not a single one of these narrators asked for any remuneration whatsoever. And truly a remarkable accomplishment for them to be identifying themselves with these stories of moral courage, of rescuers. And that was the subject matter of all of these films.
Was the breadth of compassion is undeniable in these films. And I always wondered if Steven Spielberg had seen your films before he made Schindler's List. And I wondered about that because they probably were available to him.
You know, the filming of Schindler's List took place in Poland when I was making the second of the films, the Żegota story in Poland. And our paths did not cross, but not because I didn't wish it, but because he was a busy man and I had my own busyness to look after as well.
Well, you've been a remarkable and very valued mentor to my work. And I thought that really is something unto itself, the value of mentoring and of being mentored. Will we hear your thoughts on that?
Well, I had the experience of being mentored by an advisor who I paid to journey with me to Poland so that he could stand by and watch and listen and advise and encourage, and all of which I desperately needed. But I realized that the bones that he displayed of the content of the filming process needed the muscles and the sinews and the brains that I brought to it, because I couldn't explain to him in any meaningful way what it was that I thought should be included in the filming itself. And that was a very important mentoring issue that he agreed with. So I have learned in my own mentoring to be sparing in my guidance and not to insist upon anything, as you have learned in our work together. I never insist. I always encourage, but step back to allow you and the others who I've had over the years the chance to work with as a mentor to find their own way in terms of what they wish to prepare and process as the film proceeded.
The stories that your films tell are really ageless. And it interested me that I think it was last year, you went to Italy to 2 different towns where you had filmed, and there were celebrations and they gave awards to you for those films. Was that an unexpected event at that particular point? I mean, it says they are relevant now as well.
Well, those were 2 important visits. They came, unfortunately, about 25 years after I had promised them. When I made the films in their towns, their little small cities, they were so impressed with the fact that anybody paid attention to the bravery of their own community members who risked their lives to take on these onerous tasks of providing safety for Jewish fugitives in their towns, or who came as refugees to their towns. They were so impressed that somebody would take the time to film that I promised that I would send to them and return as soon as I could with copies of the films for all of the interviewees. I never was able to fulfill that commitment for a host of reasons, most of which were indicated earlier in these comments about other films that I got caught up in, and a business also to look after. I found that offering to come back as I did when I was 90 years of age, as a matter of fact, they celebrated my birthday with me. And they celebrated in a beautiful manner, each town, presenting me with basically the keys to the city and the offer to make it my second home if I ever came back to Italy. And that was what was my tribute.
That's a beautiful tribute. Plus, it occurs to me that the stories you tell, the people who are involved are really responsible for an exponential generation living today because they survived, because of these rescuers. So I guess it's impossible to compute how many people today really are alive because of what these people in all these different countries, because of the moral courage they exhibited and the compassion. It's an amazing story. Oh, thank you so much, Sy. I would encourage everybody to go to the website of the Holocaust Museum. Do you have another comment you'd like to end with?
Well, it's only to thank you for this opportunity to share the story. I've shared it in the state of Pennsylvania at State College, where I had received an award for the first of the films. I showed it in Philadelphia at the National Polish Alliance organizational meeting in Philadelphia. And I've shown it in Pittsburgh area. So it's been a pleasure for me to identify with the Philadelphia and the Pennsylvania aspects, along with the others that other areas that have shown the films. And I would encourage people who have the slightest interest to get in touch with me if they're interested in sharing their stories. I can always contribute or try to contribute in a meaningful way. So they just need to get in touch with you, Carole, and through you, I would be pleased to try to be helpful. It's a remarkable opportunity for everyone to have, and I certainly encourage it.
Well, I'm so grateful for your friendship, your mentorship, and your agreeing to share with our audience on this program. And I think there's a whole generation of filmmakers walking around today like me who are benefits of your wisdom and experience and compassion. Thank you so much, Sy. So everybody, please check out these important pieces of American filmmaking. And I look forward to joining you again next time on Producer's Toolbox. Thank you so much.